preparation of resilient urban landscape framework for low income state housing in Tamil Nadu. He taught urban design for 3 decades in SPA Delhi and was the founding president of the Institutes of Urban Designers India. He is the member of Governing Council of NID Vijayawada, member at a National Advisory Committee on Heritage Cities, mentor of the Smart City Mission on Public Open Spaces. He was the former chairman of Delhi Urban Art Commission. He has traveled extensively across the world, and his practice includes design of greenfield cities, cultural buildings, memorials, adaptive reuse, and urban conservation. His work and research are published in journals and books internationally. He has consistently pursued sustainable architectural and urban design, campaigning the cause in multiple international forums and academia. So I would like to inform that the first part of the session will talk about the reading of urban landscape, and the second will consist of 4 case studies, demonstrate the application of the principle from section 1 in the executed project, followed by the questionnaire session. And I would like to request all the participants to please put the question in the chat box. We'll have the questionnaire session after the lecture. So hope you will enjoy this session. So yes, sir, over to you, sir. And we are.
I'd like to start by thanking you, Anupama, and Dr. Sivan, for both of you for inviting me to do this session. I'm very happy to do this. I'm able to refresh whatever I've been doing all these years and condense them into a presentation. B, because I started my teaching career by teaching landscape architecture. Back in 1981, I taught in JNTU in Hyderabad, and I taught landscape architecture to the final year students. And I was completely raw in my experience as far as landscape is concerned. And I flew down to Delhi, met with Shahir and got lots of notes from him. And I used to prepare for, say, 3 to 4 hours to do a 2-hour lecture. Every morning I'll get up at 4 o'clock and I'll prepare and I'll run off to college and do my lecture. So that was my first experience. That's the first time I started teaching. And that actually was like a man-eater tasting blood. Then I decided that this is my real calling and I should move into teaching. So that's how I came to SPA and joined urban design. Landscape has been something very, very close to me, in my heart in many ways. And if I was not an urban designer, I would have been a landscape architect. That's for sure. So I'm most happy to be talking to you people in the landscape architecture department. And the first part of my talk today is basically about how do you prepare yourself to do the reading of the city, reading of the urban landscape. That's the first part. And there are few principles that I've drawn up. You will not find them in any referenced in any books or anything because it's completely out of my last 45 years of urban design experience and 46 years actually to be precise of urban design experience. And if you find it obscure or you have doubts, we'll have a small session on question answer towards the end. Yeah? So first thing is to ask the question, what is the urban landscape as perceived by an urban designer? Yeah? I'm not pretending to be a landscape architect. I'm not a landscape architect. My perceptions are always what I would call an integrated view of natural and man-made elements, of which some are seen. What is on top of the ground is seen. What is not on top of the ground is not seen in physical terms. But apart from that, apart from the physical objects which are seen and not seen, there are also experiences which are visible, physical, and experiences which are non-physical. Yeah? So the approach to urban landscape must contain all these together. That's when you get a holistic or wholesome experience of the urban landscape. So we'll have to deconstruct the structure of the components that you see in the landscape. And then when you deconstruct and you understand the linkages between them, we'll realize that the linkage actually is where the meanings are vested in the linkages. You know? And when I say this, just simple example is like between two males, one could be a father and the other could be a son. That is the link between the two of them. Or it could be a friend, a classmate, and that could be the link between the two of you. Or between a man and a woman, similarly, could be wife, could be girlfriend, could be sister, could be a friend, could be many different types, ways in which it's the relationship which actually invests the objects with meaning. Yeah? We can discuss this later if anybody has any more problems about it. But then the study of the component structure, that is, break everything down into components and structure, when you analyze something, and the relationship in the urban landscape will yield patterns. We read those patterns, and that can be then can be organized, and we can add to them to make the existing and the proposed integral to each other. So once you understand the quintessential characteristics of a landscape, your intervention will become integral to what is there already, what is existing. That's when there is least amount of conflict between the proposal and its actual context. We'll go into the point of context later. Now, these are the 11 characteristics here. And I have a quote from Khalil Gibran, which actually I want to use. I'm using this to generate a certain way of thinking, a certain mood in your mind, so that you are able to receive what is being said, not simply as physical knowledge or information, but also as an experiential, as a dream that you have. Yeah? So it says your house is your larger body. It grows in the sun and sleeps in the stillness of the night, and it is not dreamless. Does not your house dream? And dreaming, leave the city for grove or hilltop. In other words, there is a symbiotic relationship between the enclosed space and the open space, symbiotic relationship between built form and nature, and they long to be with each other. And it is that longing that's poetically expressed by Khalil Gibran here. Now, in order to approach the urban landscape, I have now here underlined the 11 principles, and I will illustrate each of these principles to you, and I'll also explain the basic nature of it. Okay. The first one is nature, urban, form, people. I've deliberately written it without any gap between them because there is a fusion of nature, urban form, and people, which actually forms the totality or the wholeness of the city. Now, the second point is immersion. I'll move on and I'll explain to you each of these separately. Now, here is nature, urban form, people. How the whole thing is actually an integral part of our urban experience. And urban design is the design of lived experience of the city. Urban design is not simply about designing object or locating them, visually pleasing in a visually pleasing way in relationship to each other. It's about activities, it's about space, it's about the ephemeral things that are there in the environment, And it's the totality of the urban experience is what actually an urban designer tries to design for. It's why we do what the act of design, in fact, implies that we are, in fact, expecting or expressing the experience of the user is anticipated when we design. And for that, we need to understand public behavior, we need to understand the people, the nuances of the social structures, we need to understand nature, we need to understand built form, we need to understand all these as a totality to be able to design the lived experience of the city. This is, in essence, my definition of urban design is that it is the design of lived experience of the city. Now, there is a small film here. Can I ask Anupama to play the film? There's a 4-minute film which is actually dealing with the idea of immersion. And immersion is can be explained as the subject-object fusion. Subject is our consciousness and our awareness. Object is what you are gazing upon or what you're looking at. And the fusion of the two is the process of immersion. This is the first characteristic that we need to seek while we approach understanding the urban landscape, is that one has been immersed in that landscape. And the landscape and you will become one. That's when the real immersion happens.
Yes.
In his study of ecology, one of David Fleming's most intriguing ideas was encounter.
Encounter is the act of recognizing something, a planet, a woodland, a person. It's the acknowledgement that there is something there which has the gift of life, self, soul, and the ability to surprise. When the animal ecologist Stefan Harding observed the little muntjac deer in Rushbed's Wood, there was the encounter.
I was very honoured to be quoted by him in Lean Logic. So yes, I think we were, we felt a very strong affinity for each other. Well, encountering means really meeting something in a way that goes beyond one's intellectual process. So normally in the West, particularly as a scientist, as I am, one's taught to encounter, say, a tree through one's ideas. So how did the shape of that tree come about through the process of natural selection? What might the forces have been that made, say, the sycamore leaf the shape it is? And, it becomes a sort of instinct when you're a scientist and an ecologist to look at nature in that sort of way. That's not encounter. Encounter is when that conceptual structure vanishes and you actually meet the being as the being, coming forth from itself as itself, revealing itself to you in a way that's beyond your intellect, in a way that's much more deeply intuitive and much harder to express. In fact, scientific language is inappropriate for this kind of encounter. It's poetry that does it. It's a poetic encounter. Well, I had many experiences of this kind of encounter with the muntjac deer that I studied for my doctorate. And some of the moments I most remember would be when I was just waiting, and for many minutes or hour or more, nothing would happen. And then, if I was lucky, a muntjac would appear and just stand, even just for a few seconds. And if I was lucky, it would look in my direction. Then time stood still. Time stopped. And there was this infinite moment of meeting between myself and the muntjac. There was a sense of the being of the muntjac as a revelation, as if some kind of syrupy smoke was moving from the muntjac to me, infusing my whole being with muntjacness. So I could immediately understand the wholeness of the muntjac and how they relate to the entire wood. I could have an intuitive perception of that in that instant, but who the muntjac were as an animal with their own ecological niche in the forest. And it went further than that. I could also get a sense of the ecology of the whole forest. It suddenly came into focus through the being of the mudjack. The whole came into my perception. And then if I was very lucky, then that wholeness would spread out and I'd get a sense of the ecology of the entire earth. That didn't happen very often, but that was possible. It was possible for it to expand. So in other words, I sank into myself. I sank into my wider body, which is, as my friend David Abraham would say, is the earth herself. I became aware of my wider body, all through the presence of the mudjack, because for me the mudjack became a kind of totemic animal. I'd spent so much energy and effort, intellectual effort, physical effort, emotional effort in studying them, that all those energies became concentrated in the mudjack, which for me symbolized all these different aspects of the ecology of the wood and indeed of the earth herself.
When Stephen Harding observed that little muntjac deer in Rushbed's Wood, there was encounter. When what you've been studying looks back at you, it's not understanding that hangs in the air, but hello, there's conversation. You're not alone, and that can start you thinking.
Thank you, Brahma. And we had this little film on the encounter, which actually talks about the fusion of the subject and the object. The scientist talked about how the deer that he was researching has become one with him in that one moment of it when it glanced at him. Yeah, this is an example of immersion, and it is this immersion which actually is so basic in the way we study a landscape or an urban landscape. What we normally do is we start analyzing, we collect data and we start analyzing, and we miss out all those unmanifest aspects of a landscape because our analysis then clouds our view about all our intuitions. So the important thing is first, in the first visit that one makes to a site or first visit that you make to a city, you don't analyze. You simply experience the city. It is in the second visit that you start breaking things down to components and structure, and you begin to analyze. You turn things into numbers, you make Excel sheets and so on, is the subsequent actions. The first action is to immerse oneself in the urban landscape. The second aspect is what I have called experiential. That is, here the subject-object reverses. That is, the object and the subject is fused. That is, the emphasis is on the object, on what you're looking at, rather than on yourself. In the previous one, it was about oneself, how oneself would fuse oneself with the object. And here the object is inverted and becomes the main catalyst or the driver of the experience of fusion. That's what is called an experiential viewpoint. Yeah? So the image you see here is from Shantiniketan. You will see that the 3-4 images I have for this experiential thing are all things in which people have not just visual experiences, but there is music, there is smell, there is smoke, there is a tactile quality, there is fear, there is anxiety, there is happiness, there is thrill, there's spiritual connect. There are so many different ways in what one actually connects with what one sees. And it's very intensely experienced in religious places where I'm an atheist. I don't go to temples. I go to temples out of what I very pretentiously call an anthropological interest in the activities in the temple. And this is an image from Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu, where Ramana Maharshi lives and used to live. And this is an example of how an experiential aspect of an event actually leaves such deep impressions in the way we perceive our environment. There's also another interesting religious location It's called Kheer Bhavani in Kashmir. This Kheer Bhavani is a form of Devi, and it's the main principal deity of the Pandits of Kashmir. And there's an annual pilgrimage there, and I happen to have been there for a few years ago at the annual pilgrimage. And you can see that it's not just about the visuality of the place. If you look at the structure, it is just a normal, brick and mortar and concrete kind of structure. And there is a very rectangular, well-lined khund with some little water in it. But the environment that is generated has the spiritual energy of the place and the people. And that is the experience that cannot be replaced by drawing this scene in black and white and converting it into a structure and space and water body and design elements and looking at the analysis of the design's antecedents and so on. You cannot bring the totality of that experience. That experience is something that you have to intuitively imbibe in yourself. So another image from the same place where families, huge number of families from all over, Pandit families from all over Kashmir and outside, come and camp there for a few days. So it is not just about visiting the shrine once and doing your arti or your puja and coming home. It's about an entire lived experience of a place of great intensity. Now I'll move to a very interesting section called context, which is basically, context is about the ecology of connections. What kind of connections can you create? Can you perceive? Can you intuit out of your physical experience of visiting a site? This is a site in Rewa, MP, where I had designed a cultural center. And there's a sacred tree here, which actually you can see those little colored things splattered on the floor. They are little cloth things which the tribals come and tie on this tree, which is just another tree, but it is a sacred tree for them. Yeah? And that's part of the land on which I'm building. So I must understand that this land is not an inert mass of earth and water and rock, but it's something that is more charged with people's subjectivity than just being a land parcel. Another example from the same site where you have a massive physical presence of rock, and all these things that you see and experience in the site. In the first visit, it's actually not analysis of all this. First visit is a communion with the context. It's not communication. It's a little more than communication. It is called communion, which simply means a complete fusion of what you are and what the other is. You know? So when you look at rocks like this, yeah, and you see water and it being reflected, and the scale of the rock, its texture, its form, all of it is telling you something about what you could do there or what you should be doing there. Yeah? So that same context in the same project becomes much more than just the physical land, but it becomes the antecedents of performing arts, because this is a dance and theater set of classrooms for dance and theater. And you can see the image of the dancer on top, where it is a very well-known, famous dancer of the 1930s called Mr. Ram Gopal, who was a Sri Lankan. Basically, he was a Kannadiga who migrated to Sri Lanka, and he was the first one to take Bharatanatyam or Indian dance or improvised Bharatanatyam abroad. And this sketch is done by a very well-known theoretician on ballet dance in New York, one Mr. Ambrose, who was a curator also of the museum there. And this is a sketch drawn by him. And it shows Ram Gopal in different forms, different postures, within different mudras, but somehow connected on all different ways. So when I was beginning to design this place, I started understanding the context of the function of this place as a dance and theatre school, as a number of beings which are still but are dynamically connected at the same time. That's the condition of the dancer. The dancer is at once still and at the same time is in movement. So it was that which I wanted to capture, and therefore I used this diagram as an image on which I could shape my plan. And the plan that you see at the bottom is the plan that is derived out of it, a series of 7 classrooms which are interlinked by corridors which are almost moving like Ram Gopal's hands and limbs. So it creates an environment which is in complete dynamic motion, even though the places where you learn are still places. They're square plans, square halls, about 10 meter by 10 meter, and they are places which are kind of still, and the connection between them are dynamic. So this is how the idea of a dance school imbibed its inspiration from a diagram of a dancer. Yeah. So it's a matter of how do you conceptualize the ecology of your connections. That is what we call context. On the side, you can see another image. This image is very close to Riva. It's called Suhag Hills. You climb up, when you're going by land, you climb up a big hillock, rocky hillock, and on the plateau is where Riva city is sitting. Now, in that rocky hillock are a number of caves which go back to thousands of years, with rock paintings, rock art. Rock arts are often from say 2,000 to 10,000 years old, they can be. Yeah? So there was the first landscape drawing that I ever saw. Perhaps one of the first landscapes which were ever drawn is this series of huts in the foreground. You can see those triangular formations and with smokes coming out of them. And you can see that there is not just one sun, but there are a number of suns. So this number of suns denote movement of time. The smoke denotes human activity. And the physical objects are defined by the triangular hut forms. This was a very, very interesting image of landscape, which became my source of inspiration for creating the skyline of the whole project. So the skyline also then was organized like a series of hutments of the same building. This skyline is of the same building that you see on your left with the dance and theater workshops. And that these so completely unconnected things, but are connected in spirit to Riva and to the activity that's taking place inside these places, were actually brought together to create a totally new way of defining the context of the project. And that gave rise to the form. You know? So here's another image of a detailed shot of the Suhag Hills, how the rocks are organized. And this is a detail of the building, the plans that you saw. It has been built since 10 years, 15 years it's been built. And you can see how I have used this texture and the color and of the rock formations as the outer walls for the outer walls of these dance halls. These rocks are not painted rocks. They are natural colored rocks which are found in the Suhag Hills. So there's a direct connect that's made with the land and the qualities of the land, its color, its texture, its experience, which is then translated into the building itself. There's another very interesting connection here. This is from Wardha, where Gandhiji lived for many years in Wardha, in a guest house owned by the Bajaj group. And from there, only he first started propagating the idea of khadi. Now, this building that you see here is the kitchen in which Kasturba Gandhi used to cook. So it's just another ordinary small building, if you see it, but the building is charged with the idea of and the memory of Kasturba Gandhi and Gandhiji himself. Kasturba Gandhi was also a person of great strength and great qualities, which is often not publicized as much as that of her husband Gandhi. But this very humble building was the actual place where she lived and worked from. She lived in the back, and this was her kitchen extension where she used to cook. So the kitchen, I had the opportunity to conserve this building. And here, the memory of Kasturba Gandhi becomes the ecology of my building. Now, another way of defining, there are many different ways in which you can define context. And this one is, this is a plan of Connaught Place. And you will wonder from where this circle came. Yeah? There is a certain genealogy of form, which you can unearth when you look at Connaught Place. And you define the context of Connaught Place not merely from its location in Latin's plan, but also from its antecedents. What you have on the other side, our first one is the Tholos temple in Delphi, which is from 4th century BC. That is just about the time of, between the time of Buddha and Ashoka, or Mahavira and Ashoka. 4th century BC is where this temple was, and it was a circular temple which is colonnaded. Yeah? And you can see another example of a similar structure in the European context, where in the city of Bath, UK, you have what is called the Circus, which is actually a commercial center of Bath, which is also conceptualized in a circle, much smaller circle than Connaught Place, but conceptualized, however, as a circle with a colonnaded walkway at the bottom of it, at the ground floor of it. So the experience is very much like being in Connaught Place. And these are the antecedents of this plan. So when you look for a context, you can also look at the genealogy of the form that you are looking at. When you go to study Connaught Place, it is not just about, a kind of circular configuration with different blocks and, there is a front and there is a concave surface and the convex surface. All these are there, but they also have an antecedent. Now, unfortunately, recently they've been spreading a rumor that the Parliament building is a takeoff on the Devi temple that you have in Morena, on the Tantric temple in Morena, which is a complete falsification because it's a totally different typology if you study it. It was a falsification which was created by one of the archaeologists who just said that, oh, this reminds me of the Indian Parliament. So then now it is being repeated by a number of people saying that the Indian Parliament, Latins visited that Morena temple and he did the Indian Parliament. Indian Parliament has antecedents in European and Greek and Roman cultures, not in Morena. Now, this is an example from Singapore. I'll take you around the world in this thing because it's all images which I had gathered over a long period of time. And I spent considerable time excavating, images which will connect with the ideas that one is trying to make. Here, for instance, what we call, you can see how these red roofs that you find is a traditional built form. And the big blocks that you see is the new modern Singapore. Now, they have, of course, preserved this, this traditional form. And you can see that the kind of texture and grain that you find in the old fabric is so completely different in the new fabric. And it's possible that if you're building in the old fabric, you have to understand that there is this texture in it. And if you're building in the new area, you need to understand that you have dealing with a completely different kind of texture, which is the result of bylaws like coverage and height and FAR and so on, which is all commercially driven. And the other one was more communally driven. You know? So there are varying contexts which you can find in the same city. This is often the case between the old cities that we have in India and the newer part of the city. And depending on what you are studying or where you are going to do your work, you have to understand the grain and texture of the place and respect that so that it will be, as I said, initially integral in it. The proposal will be integral to what is existing. Now, this is another way of looking at context. Once again, in Singapore, this is also a context, but a context that is invented. In fact, this is the Bay Area, which was designed by Moshe Safdie. And in the night, the whole place becomes a spectacle and becomes a very big tourist draw. Thousands of people come to watch these strobe lights which are emanating from the building in the night. And they have created a completely new context to Singapore, creating a modern environment, modern image for the whole. In fact, a group of buildings almost determining the entire image of the country or what the country stands for. It's the same case with the Sydney Opera Hall. When you say Australia, you remember Sydney Opera Hall. When you see Sydney Opera Hall, you think of Australia. So it's a direct connect that is established between the new context that is generated and the memory of the place that it is standing in. This is another example of the same thing, often invented this one. This is the same area from another view where an entire area is completely lit up and it's all public squares and crazy forms and buildings to create an image and a new context for the economy of Singapore. This is the center of its investment, center of its economy. And this is what the lake that you see here is an artificial lake. It's an extension of the dike. And then around that is conceptualized this whole spectacle, which then together with the water and the reflections and the light becomes the new image of the economic energy of Singapore. So this becomes a new invented context for Singapore. Now, from the context, I'm moving to what is called a way of seeing. That is how people invest a place with their own emotion. Yeah? So a way of seeing actually changes depending on how you connect with a place. If you connect with a temple as a place of worship and you are actually a devotee of the deity inside, you have one kind of relationship. And if you are a tourist who is looking at, or if it's me who is going there as an architect to understand and study the details of the temple so that I can place it historically and I can look at its antecedents and I can understand the age in which it is built. I look at the materials. I look at all those things. I do go and see the deity because it's a very intense experience, but not out of any piety, but out of sheer curiosity for that experience. So that changes the view of a place depending on the way of seeing the place. Here's an example from Rio, where there's an artist called George Celeron, who you can see him sitting here with a red t-shirt and a cap, red cap. He lost his wife who was pregnant. Yeah. And he was so heartbroken that he left his home after he lost his wife and the child together in an accident. and he came to the street and he adopted this staircase as his home. And he started fully immersed in that space. He started doing his artwork. As an artist, he started doing his artwork on the staircase. And the entire stair has been decorated by him. It's a continuous, pretty long stair in Brazil. I went visiting, these are my pictures. All the pictures, by the way, that you see here are my own pictures. And this is also my picture of it. And the experience of being there is depending on the way this man saw that space. Yeah? So the way he saw it now yields its character and its context, because this man has invested his emotional hurt in that space. And he creates this mosaic formations all over the place in very crazy, unconnected, unrelated kind of form. And he invites people to donate tiles to him. So many people from across the world send him tiles from different types of tiles. There are also some Ganesh, etc., also in his vocabulary. Some Indians have sent him some pictures from here with deities and so on. And he creates an entire art piece out of the staircase, because that's the way he saw that staircase. And he invested his emotion in that staircase. So from an ordinary staircase, it became an extraordinary piece of art, and therefore now a very big tourist draw. Every tourist who goes to Rio also goes and visits this staircase now. So he has totally changed the meaning of that staircase, because that's the way he saw it, and then he invested his emotion because of the way he saw it. Here is the next issue that I want to discuss, is what we call a deep structure in any city. Every city, particularly old cities, particularly religious cities, have what we call a deep structure in urban design. It's not the physical structure. It's not just analysis of components and connections and interrelationships. It's about the hidden presence of a structure, which is not necessarily perceivable in the first go, but is embedded in the morphology of the city. And it is the deep structure which gives it meaning. Here is an example of Banaras, where there are two structures. One is of what is traditionally known as the Karmukha form, where you have this kind of segmental arches in the plan form of the city. And then you have a certain grid which is superimposed on the Banaras city. And the result is that you get a pretty complex structure of form, of movement and spaces and locations. And that then manifests as the temples and kunds and gardens and public spaces and sculptures and chhatris and the whole Ghats itself. So it is in this structure that it's this kind of semicircular formation that actually has Vishwanath temple as its focal point, that generates the energy for the humongous structures of the Ghats. So there is the deep structure which has a hidden presence in the way Banaras is seen. So if you go to Banaras and see it for all its functional structures, and you think that what you need to put is more industry to revive its economy, then you're completely looking at the wrong path, because you missed out the fact that it has a deep structure, and whatever interventions we do should not destroy that deep structure, because it's a structure which is embedded in the form and it's been there for thousands or hundreds of years. You know? Now, another example of deep structure and the hidden presence are these two maps that you see here. They are pilgrim maps, yeah? And they're both mythical landscapes. Or the smaller yellow map that you see is that of Brij Bhumi. And it's not just one city. It is actually an entire terrain which is which has Mathura and Vrindavan as its focus, but is known as the Braj Bhumi. So somehow it has so many locations and events which are connected with Krishna's life. So the life and the history and the mythical values, mythical frameworks that you see in Krishna's life is actually identified in one plan. And the pilgrims have actually chalked out how to move from one location to the other as an image plan. And this is sold to the tourists. So there is that Charasi course which is there in Vrindavan, which you can go from one place from Gokul to Barsana to to Mathura to Vrindavan to Radhakund to various locations. You can move through this. This whole thing is conceptualized as Brij Bhumi, and there's a map that is drawn on the basis of mythical landscapes, which gives this whole Bhumi, Brij Bhumi. It's not a planning region. It is a mythical landscape which creates the region in the mind of the tourists. They may be falling in different districts, and they may be also falling in different wards, etc. So there may be many other boundaries which actually divide them, but they are unified by the idea of the mythology of Krishna. So this is an entire sub-region, not just a building. What you have on the other side is a map of Gaya, Bodh Gaya. And this Bodh Gaya is, here you can see how a pilgrim imagines Bodh Gaya. There is a Bakasura lying in the lake, in the river. And you can see that all the important events in the city, that is physical events in terms of the urban landscape, whether these are important trees or they are buildings or they are waterways, there is even the train and there is the car, and everything is depicted in the plan in a way not necessarily as a measured drawing, but as a plan which is illustrated in 3 dimensions and is linking all these things together to create the idea of Gaya as a sacred city. Now I move on to the other aspect which is so critical for perceiving the urban landscape, is what I've called the sense of the local. Now here, locality is not meant to be, like we normally understand, we live in this locality or we live in that locality. Here, locality is an urban design concept. As an urban design concept, a locality is a place where there is a focused set of physical energies and a place which invites people to rest there. So you get this idea of locality expressed. This image is from Kathmandu in Nepal, where you can see there's a confluence of roads and there are temples, there are steps, there are kind of covered areas, there are all kinds of things happening from different directions. People are moving towards this place. And once again, very interestingly, it's qualified by a tree. In many of these cases, you will see the tree or a natural element plays a very critical role in defining the characteristics of the Indian urbanity. This is a very important thing for us to understand. And we have to see the relationship between the bell form and the tree or vegetation in a way as to construct a holistic image of a place. That's when you get the sense of the local in that location. Now I move to another concept, which is not a new concept at all. It's actually comes from the Roman time. It's called genius loci, which actually means the spirit of a place. The word locality comes from, this word loci comes from the same root as locality. That means a place or a space. So these are the points. Genius loci is the point where an entire urbanism finds its condensation. There's a very interesting quote from this gentleman called Alexander Pope, who was a poet who wrote a lot on the poetry on the gardens at that time. He lived in the 17th century, 17th, 18th century. And he says, consult the genius of the place in all, that tells the waters to rise or fall, or helps the ambitious hill the heavens to scale, or scoops the circling theatres the veil, calls in the country, catches opening glades, joins willing woods and varies shades from shades, now breaks or now directs the intending lines, points as you plant and as you work designs. So he is writing about the medieval garden, and he wrote a lot on the qualitative content, the poetic content of gardens, and he writes about how the spirit of the place is actually imbibed into a garden. The example I've used here is from my favorite place in the country, is actually the Tulsi Bagh Square in Pune. This the plan and section were kindly lent to me by Kiran Kalamdani, who had actually done a conservation plan for this space. Now, this Tulsi Bagh is embedded in the middle of a dense old city, and it suddenly opens into this near heaven place where you have, I'll show you more images of Tulsi Bagh, where the entire spirit of that whole old district is condensed into one place. It's like, an accumulated condensation which actually contains the quintessential qualities of an entire place. It's surrounded on all sides by shops and houses. It's a very busy street all around it, not just around the space, but in the whole district. You have the Mahatma Phule market also in the same district. So it's a traditional commercial location with very intense mixed use. And Tulsi Bagh is like a heaven inside that space. And you can see how so many old people, retired people, come and sit on the benches there. And they watch people go by and people greet them and they talk to them. And it's a social space where all these people who live around that actually come and relax. And the place it has some magical qualities. If you ever go to Pune, do visit Tulsi Bagh. Tulsi Bagh is really worth seeing. It has lovely trees in it and a very old wooden temple. Here are more images of Tulsi Bagh, the same seat where the group of old men were sitting, fewer people in this shot. And you can see how it leads into the temple space. And it's not that just there is one temple. There are many things happening there, many different activities happening, including some domestic activities. People who live on top, they come here to wash their clothes. You can see that housewives are washing their clothes, and just leading out from the door in the extreme end is the main road itself. So it's a busy place which has this heavenly space in the nested within the fabric of the old city. So this place is what you can call the genius loci of that location, and it's the condensed quintessential qualities of the urbanism that you find in this one space. More images of it. Same place where, interestingly, the mandapa is a very transparent kind of mandapa. It actually does not divide the space. Of course, it does divide the space as well as it unites it visually from all sides. So the whole atmosphere is that of a cool, quiet, still place where time is standing still. So it's a place where you go and relax. You pray, you relax, you social. You do all your other chores, but in an extremely calm environment, which at the same time is not a place out in the open in the suburb. It's a place in the heart of Pune, and therefore imbibes the very spirit of the urban fabric around it. So next issue is what you call the sense of place. That is, spaces, the difference between place and space is normally discussed in the urban design studio. And here, the way a space is turned into a place is when there is subjectivity and emotion infused and invested in that space. That's when it gets a sense of place. So from a space, an ordinary inert space, it gets a sense of place because there is subjectivity and emotion invested in it. This is an image from Gwalior, and you can see that singular tree is in fact lending it the quality of the sense of place, because it visually anchors and provides you an inviting image to walk into that square. It's a little rectangular square in one of the chhatris in Gwalior. This is another example of the sense of place. You must notice the very important roles trees plays. Different type of trees, their scale, size, form, foliage, their qualities, their characteristics, their flowering seasons, their nature of the tree is very essential in creating an urban landscape. This is an image from Shantiniketan town, where it is said that Tagore used to take classes under this tree, and where this tree actually just covers around the whole space and makes the space so special and so different from anything else, and invests it with that sense of history, sense of emotion, and turns that space into a place. Here's another example also from Shantiniketan. Once again, it's the trees which play the role here. If you remove the trees from here, it becomes a barren land and you don't know where to go. But the moment you have the tree, there's an immediate energy that invites a person to that location, and you understand the urban landscape not as just mere ensemble of buildings and spaces and vegetation, but as places where there is emotions invested. There's an example from Cochin, from inside the Cochin Biennale. So there is this very interesting tree around which the Biennale people built a chabutra, where people come and sit and relax. And they also put some swings on it. So it becomes a place out of an empty space that it was. It was a go-down. This whole thing that you see inside is a go-down, where in the Portuguese time, they used to store sacks of goods to be exported abroad into the sea. So this was just a location, a planned location inside that. And when the Biennale began, they identified very intuitively these locations which can actually provide it with a sense of place. And here is a very small interventions by them have actually turned that into a space. That space has now become a place. Now people give reference to, I'll meet you at that tree, and people come here to meet in this location. So it becomes a point of reference because of very small interventions, but sensitive interventions, which accentuates its qualities of place. There's another example from the Lingaraj temple outside, just outside the Lingaraj temple in Bhubaneswar. Once again, it's the tree which a chabutra around it. That becomes the center point around which the hawkers gather, people come and sit here, people park here. And it's now become, it has developed a sense of place from just an open space. It was just an open space around the Lingaraj temple, and just the presence of the tree actually converts that from a space to a place. Now I'm moving to the next point, which is called the outdoor room. And in the outdoor, this is an example from Italy. This is the famous square in Siena, where there is a whole space which has a nice sloping floor in brickwork. The stripy floor that you find at the bottom is of brickwork, is a brick-laid space, and it has a very well-designed, very restrained wall around it, but it has no roof. So this is not, and it's surrounded by very dense urban fog. So this is not just another place, but it's an outdoor room. When the festival is going on in Siena, they have this festival called Palio. You must have known those Fiat cars which were named Palio some time back. That actually name comes from this festival, where the entire Siena town, neighborhoods take part in it, and each neighborhood is in competition with the other. They have their own uniform, their slogan, their flag, their music, and they compete for various things in this location. And it has a very defined wall and a very defined floor. There's another example from Iran of the outdoor room, which has walls and a floor, but no roof. This is the Tazieh. During the Tazieh celebration in Iran, the village square becomes the venue for theater which enacts the death of Ali. When Ali goes to fetch water for the people, and how he comes back wounded, and how his hand was cut off and he comes back. And that whole thing is enacted every year in this space. And the entire arena, the entire built form around the square becomes the stage. Becomes the seating where people watch the Tazieh procession. You can see the red, kind of cart which is being pulled by people. They're moving slowly in the crowd, and you can see how people are watching from all around. This is a typical example of an outdoor room. So in old cities where you have this kind of open spaces, they're actually not just spaces, they're rooms in which many activities take place, and many things are given meaning in such spaces. Now we move to a very important component in urban design called typology. Typology is something that you can apply both to spaces, buildings, and entire urban fabrics. So it's an idea which can be scaled from that of an individual object to a large city. Now, there's an example of a Jain mandir in Old Delhi, in Shahjahanabad, and where you can see that the open court then becomes the place of the discourse by the guru, and the whole mohalla assembles around it in a ritual form, in a very specific song. And this building actually is not just any other building. You don't find buildings like this in most other cities or in most other parts of Delhi. You find this only specifically in these locations where you enter through a narrow entrance into a courtyard, and then you have this kind of platform-like rooms all around it, and you have a staircase that goes up to another room on top, or other rooms on top. So it's a specific typology of buildings which actually shows a certain pattern in the structure, in the way the spaces and form is structured. That's what we call typology. Similar example from Florence. Of course, there was also at one time a hospital. This space was all around it. They treated the sick people. The nuns used to care for people here. And this is a very similar outdoor room, which is also a specific typology in urbanism. Now, when you apply the idea of typology to building, and in contemporary terms, what you see are these horrendous housing that you see here. One is in Dwarka in Delhi, is group housing, which is a specific typology. The group housing is a very specific typology. And on the other side, you find low-income housing in Chennai, which is a contiguous wall-like structure with hundreds of thousands of units on either side with a central corridor. That's another typology, But these are not necessarily the most desirable typology. But it's important that when you study the urban landscape, you need to record these differences in building types and how certain patterns emerge from their structure. There's an example of row housing in Singapore, which of course is restored now, but it goes back to the early periods of Singapore. And you can see how these row housings actually are a specific typology of buildings. They have large halls as you enter in the ground floor, and all the living spaces are on top. They have a little garden. It's almost like a suburban typology, but it's not suburban typology. It is in the old part of Singapore, which are buildings which are restored and maintained. There's another example of the patterns of structure. Here you have housing on top and shopping below, like we have in Khan Market and places like that, which was a very common typology during the colonial period. And in Singapore, they have continued some of these typologies in council housing now, currently built council housing. So you have a domestic and a commercial activity intermingled. So together they create a certain spatial type, these long verandas and shopping arcades on either side, but completely residential on top. Once the shop is shut, all the residents flow out into the street, and then it becomes a domestic space. And this is a very specific typology which allows for that kind of transition in its functions. There's another example of labour housing from Brighton, UK. These are like very narrow, small houses with a staircase going right up to the upper floors, one unit in the ground floor. And it's organized along the landform. And you can see that it is, first glance, you can see that this is not upper class aristocratic housing like you find in the suburb or with a garden or any such thing. These are like very tightly packed houses, which are yielding only a certain typology can yield this kind of form. Here you can see that these are layered on the landscape and creates a completely unique urban pattern. And this pattern is part of the urban landscape that you see. Now, here is an example from Cochin, the study that I had done back in the 80s for INTAC, where we understood that when we studied the plan, we could see that there were three distinct typologies which actually inform this place. One is called the bungalow form, where there are the part which is in yellow, individual buildings which are surrounded by green. It's like the building in the garden typology. And the other is the street form, where you see the purple color. Those are actually narrow houses which are organized along the street. And on the other side, in the green side, you find the places where you have enclosed court forms, large courts which are enclosed by buildings all around it. And the image that I showed you of the swing in the Cochin Biennale actually is from this building. Can you see my arrow? Yeah? You can see my arrow?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is the building in which somewhere here is where you saw the tree. Yeah? So these are enclosed spaces, specific typology of building designed to carry out the trade. And from here, the sea used to be right here at one time. And they used to take out the goods from here and load it into ships. And the ships used to go away to Portugal or to Venice or wherever they went for trade. So this is a very specific typology. This area has that. This area has the street typology, which actually consisted of people like Eurasians, who lived in streets because they were poorer people with smaller, narrower houses. Sometimes the staircase going right up to the first floor from the road itself. And these were where the bosses lived. They still live here. All the bosses in Cochin still live in this place. There's a Cochin club here. And you have all these wonderful bungalows which are here in this area. So these are three distinct typologies in Cochin, which are just adjacent to each other, is wedged into each other, and they functioned as one unit. Economically, they functioned as one unit. At the same time, the social structure, the economic structure divided them into different groups of people and forms, and it created three distinctly different typologies. Now, when you look at the patterns of its structure, we studied all these 12 issues that you see here. Built forms, I will not go into details of this. I'll be happy to share this presentation with you all so that you can take all the material that you have here. But please make it a point to credit me if you use any of this material. Now, this is my last slide on this section. We are already quite, I've reached, because I lost about 20 minutes, 25 minutes in the beginning. We have already gone past 11 o'clock, but this is my last slide on this section. So this is an image of a roadside tailor in Kashmir, in Srinagar, inside Srinagar, where he is working actually from a cupboard, which is constructed onto the wall of the street. And that cupboard is his shop from where he does his tailoring job, which has a raised platform on which he sits and he tailors. His foot can go down into the lower part. So it's like a pit loom type of thing, but it's a workspace for this tailor. Now, the study of urban landscape involves, apart from the cold facts, analysis and inferences, the viewer's assimilation of the subject. So the viewer's assimilation of the subject-object oscillation of lived experience. When you say subject-object oscillation, it's like a pendulum that actually moves. It's a pendulum that moves up and down and is moving from subjectivity to objectivity to subjectivity to objectivity. And it is in that process that we assimilate we view our analysis, we view our decisions, and from those inferences we come to our design decisions. Yeah? Now that was the last of this set of presentations. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Any reflections? Anybody has any points to make? Anything to add? Any critical issue that you think thought is not right? Or any questions that you have, I am happy to answer. We can give it about 15 minutes time. Yeah?
Sir, there are many questions by Rajat sir.
Yeah.
So his first question is, can urban design really attempt to create an impressive experience, or it accepts its limitations? That's it.
Sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Yeah. Can urban design really attempt to create an impressive experience, or it accepts its limitations?
I must say that I never use the word impressive.
Immersive, Katie. Immersive.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm wrong. Sorry.
And yes, certainly. It actually is. This whole presentation's purpose is to prepare the student to be able to venture into a survey. Yeah? So I was just showing examples of how different ways of experiencing the city will actually shape the way you read the city. So for reading, we rely heavily on maps, plans, sections, elevations, calculations, the areas, etc., cold facts. And we think that we have done our job when we look at it from the cold facts perspective. But apart from that, there is also the intuitive, the experiential, the immersive part of a survey, which I think is very critical to be developed in the student. So that's why I emphasized it. Now, if you ask me if it can create an immersive experience, I can tell you that I experience it all the time. I feel it all the time. I don't know if that is a justification for everyone else to feel so, but I do feel in that way all the time. And as I said, these are not from any books. These are culled out of my own personal experience of interacting, designing, surveying hundreds of towns with students, walking around with students, kind of rubbing your nose on the ground, as I say. You smell the city, you feel the city, you eat the food there, you meet, talk to people, you smile, you frown, you do all kinds of things things that happen to you there. And those parts are also as important as the cold facts that we can measure. Now, as far as the cold facts are concerned, I've given a handout to Anupama, which I have requested her to make available to all students and faculty who are attending this. And
Yes.
that is an exhaustive list of these cold facts that one needs to gather while one goes into a survey.
Sure, sir.
So
Sure,
I
sir.
don't know if I answered you, Rajat.
Yes, yes, got it, Katie.
If you still have questions, please come to Delhi and we'll have a chat.
Oh, always a learning experience. Thanks, Katie.
Sir,
Hello,
hello.
ma'am. Can I ask a question, ma'am? I am Karthik from Design.
Yes, Karthik. Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. It was very informative lecture. So my understanding of today's lecture was you focused on how to empathetically connect with the people who are part of that urban systems also.
Yeah, that's right.
So you
Not only people, the tree, the buildings, the architecture, the road, the experience, everything.
yes,
The house.
yes, I understand that. So in that process, at least in your experience, sir, have you ever identified either some social problems which those people are facing in that area, and then have you tried to solve it through your urban level interventions?
Yes, certainly one tries to do that. But as far as solving social problems are concerned, design intervention is a very weak tool.
Okay, sir.
The old belief that through architecture you can transform this world, that is the modernist belief. That's actually a very, in my view, too bombastic a view of their own profession. There are limitations to how you can impact social life in a city by design. But you can certainly impact it to an extent by the way you form spaces, by the way you create sense of place in locations, by the way you understand. If you have that feeling, only can you actually create that environment again for someone else to experience.
Yes.
So the primary thing is that the designer must imbibe that feeling. That is why I focused. Initially, I was working on elaborating that list which I gave to Anupama as the presentation, which I then midway decided that this is not what I should be telling them. I should be telling them not about how to measure, but about how to sense, how to feel. That's actually equally, I'm not saying that the numbers and analysis and etc., maps, drawing sections, the way we try to understand, we architects try to understand things is we break things down and we could turn them into dimensions. When you talk about a spatial quality, we convert that into ratio between floor and wall, and not that they are not important, but that alone does not yield an experience. An experience is something that is very widely defined, and those experiences can actually impact the way people grow up. Children grow up in that environment.
Yes, sir. That was really good. But at the same time, don't you think the way they grow up, and then how they experience that place and how they they interact with the other people who are present in their areas, it also plays a major role?
Yes, of course. There are different types of user groups in any site. And if you think that through public participation you can get a consensus from them, we are mistaken. Because you can never arrive at consensus because all the spaces are contested spaces. different communities have different ways of relating with the outdoor space, and their relationships are often contradictory. For instance, if you take, when you go to a place like Daryaganj in Delhi, it's a place where there's a large concentration of publishers. Their interest is in the vehicle entering this area and bringing huge hoards of books which can be stored in various buildings and so on. That is their area of interest. But there's a whole group of residents who don't want those trucks to come inside with these fat books. And they don't want their buildings to become dead uses like storage. And they are both legitimate users. The trader is a legitimate user, so is the resident a legitimate user. But they have completely conflicting requirements. They view the space in completely conflicting ways. So you have to make a choice, you have to take sides in such cases, and your decision will have to lead to favor one thing or the other. So what will you base on this? There is no prescription on it. It's something that will emerge from your experiential understanding of the space, your connect with the people who are there.
Okay, sir.
So what we call community is usually not a monolith of people with the same opinions.
Yes.
We use the word community very easily, but communities are often contesting groups.
And don't you think the way we place them while we are designing for an urban fabric would solve many problems and many conflicts which they have between each other?
Yes, physical conflicts can be certainly reduced. But what would be the social impact of those on the long term is something which you cannot necessarily predict. You can envisage some changes, but it's not necessary that the same thing will take place, because the users are very active members in shaping the environment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's not only shaped by us. It's shaped
the direction in which they are shaping it.
Absolutely. That direction you can set by creating public open spaces, by having tree-lined roads, by having children's play areas interspersed with, by having mixed use, by ensuring that the domestic quality is protected in residential areas. You know, there are all sorts of things that we can do. Just by typology, we can change a lot of things. For instance, when you have a mixed-use building, the typology becomes most critical, where you have to isolate the commercial and the storage, etc., from the residential use. So you need two types of entrances which don't intersect with each other.
Yes, sir. Because I felt that even when I was taught urban design in my bachelor's, when I also saw how it was taught in SPA Bhopal also, the connect they are very effectively making with the urban fabric and the people who are there. But what they are doing with that connect, and what are the kinds of social problems which they can solve through that? Maybe it can happen or maybe it cannot.
That's a completely different skill. Learning is one skill and doing is another skill.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They are, of course, certainly very, very interconnected skills.
Yes.
If you don't learn well, you cannot do well, for certain. Your action will not be good enough. Yeah. But just by learning something well, it's not necessary that you are prepared to act. That preparedness for action has to be driven by compassion in the mind of the designer, so that we choose the side of life and not the side of money or commerce or anything else. We choose the side of life in every case. Yeah, that is when you take the side of life, you are being non-violent, because it's not invasive.
Okay, sir.
So it is a totally different skill from. Anyway, thank you for asking this question. It's a very interesting question. Thank you.
Any other question anybody wants to ask?
I am Bhagyashree. I would like to ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
Good morning, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm from landscape architecture branch. I had one question. When we see a urban scape, how much do you see it as a part of, I mean, landscape can be part of urban association, and how much as a landscape architect one can intervene? And second question was
Yeah,
post
I still
pandemic.
did not understand your question properly. Can you please repeat the question or simplify structure for me?
Yeah, so what is a approach of landscape architect, or what can be the role of landscape architect from a urban designer point of view? What do you think should be the scope?
Can I answer that question first before you ask my next question?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sir.
So, first of all, the divisions that we have drawn between landscape architecture and urban design are an artificial division. That division actually in reality does not exist, because experience is simultaneously spanning across landscape and form. Yeah. So it is for our convenience of learning and to be able to market our skill that we get a degree in a very specific subject. In reality, urban designers have to be a landscape architect, and a landscape architect has to be an urban designer. Yeah.
Okay, so these two things are not contradictory.
Shahir was an example of this. Mohammad Shahir, who used to head SPA for a long time, he's no more unfortunately, was an extremely talented landscape architect, but he originally studied urban design. He was senior to me in urban design in SPA, and then subsequently he did landscape. And then the way he emerged, combining the design skill, his design skill and his landscape perceptions, was quite phenomenal that you can see in the last project that he did in Delhi. Unfortunately, I'm not showing that as an example here, where he has designed these Mughal gardens in Nizamuddin area near the Humayun's tomb. It's a wonderful example of design skill and perceptions about landscape, a complete understanding of the historic antecedents or the genealogy of the garden, Mughal garden. It's a perfect example of that. That came out of him, in my view, because he was also trained as an urban designer. Yeah, so he was able to combine both of them. So that ability to empathize with landscape, without that, an urban designer can only create dead cities. Similarly, sorry, yeah?
Yeah, I'm able to understand your perspective. So it's not two contradictory fields. They are actually interrelated.
No, city is nobody's monopoly. It belongs to all of us, everyone. Yeah? And we need to be floating, swimming across these boundaries to be able to perform properly.
May I ask another question?
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. Post-pandemic, how do you see the urban scape would change? Would mixed use be more appropriate future for the urban scape, or we should look at it in some different way?
You see, we cannot change the way we look at our cities only because of one pandemic. Okay, it's important that we respond to the situation of the pandemic, but not respond in such a way that you assume that everything that's happened so far were all rubbish. It's not so. Yeah? The pandemic is coming from somewhere else. Its methods of operation into our system is very different from the urban systems that we work with. Yeah? So we should not think that one is the cause of the other. Of course, we have to talk about physical distancing and so on. And if you think mixed use is one of the causes for physical not having enough physical distance, I do not subscribe to that view. I think highly dense housing is, in fact, more harmful than with very high density housing is more harmful than a mixed use. building. You know, mixed use actually provides a lot of benefits to the society. You know, it makes accessibility so much more easy for communities. They don't have to commute either to go to work or to. So mixed use was the traditional form that we followed in all our cities. And mixed use also helps us reduce the carbon footprint of cities. It has a number of benefits. The fact that it creates more mixture of outsiders and insiders in the residential area is an issue that we need to look at. For that, as I said, typological solutions have to be arrived, where you isolate them locally from each other by the manner in which we design open spaces, access systems, and entries and exits. That will yield a certain typology. So I don't know whether I answered your question.
Yeah, yes.
This is my general view on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there is any more questions, maybe we should get a 15-minute break.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
What do you say, Anupama? You are the boss.
Yes, sir. Sir, we can have 15-minute breaks.
Let's have a 15 minutes break and we'll come back, and I have another set of presentations for you where I'm demonstrating how the principles that we talked of here are actually applied in some cases, in some design of some gardens and memorials and so on. Yeah.